Good morning in Washington, D.C. Good evening in Taiwan, and welcome to those of you joining us from elsewhere in the world. My name is Marcus Garlauskas, and I'm the director of the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative of the Scowcroft Center for Strategy and Security at the Atlantic Council. Thanks for joining today's Cross-Strait and Beyond seminar on fostering US-Taiwan defense co-production. This event is sponsored by the Taipei Economic and Cultural Representative Office in the United States, TECRO. The Indo-Pacific Security Initiative is one of the Scowcroft Center's 4 elements, and through written analysis, tabletop exercise, public and private events, we inform the strategies, plans, and policies of the United States and its allies and partners to address key rising security challenges in the Indo-Pacific. Convenings like this one are pivotal to the Scowcroft Center's mission of developing sustainable, nonpartisan strategies to address the most important security challenges facing the United States and its allies and partners around the world. Today's session is going to pull together 2 different threads of our recent work. The first being production diplomacy in the region, which is co-production and defense industrial cooperation among the U.S. and its various allies and partners in the Indo-Pacific. And the second thread being our continuing work on defense, deterrence, and security related to Taiwan. Our discussion today will be specifically focusing on US-Taiwan defense production cooperation, including weapon systems, munition, and defense technology systems in general. Now, there's a lot of talk about how much we in the United States and our partners in Taiwan spend on defense. And there's also discussion on exactly what are the best weapon systems to be spending these defense dollars and these defense funds on. But maximizing the efficiency of how those resources are spent could actually be far more important than the overall amount or the specific systems that are pursued. And so with that in mind, today we'll be discussing how we can maximize the efficiency of these efforts to work together between the U.S. and Taiwan to counterbalance the shared threat to Taiwan's security and to the national security interests of the United States that comes from the massive buildup that the PRC is undertaking of military capability. Now, in particular, as we found from a recent study on defense production diplomacy led by our non-resident fellow Andrew Brown, enhancing resilience and building stockpiles and surge capacity could be some of the key elements of benefit that come from this sort of production diplomacy, this co-production approach. But we also found in this study that the application of production diplomacy requires overcoming a wide range of challenges from the technological information sharing challenges to even the legislative and political environments that may make this sort of approach more difficult, and as well as the need to overcome the potential reactions of adversaries, domestic political challenges, and even the risk of unintended technology transfer to adversaries. And so I'm looking forward to what should be a great in-depth conversation today with 3 experts that we'll have speaking on today's panel. They include General Stephen Rudder, Lotte Danielson, and Dr. Wu Su Lee. Now, we're going to have 2 rounds of discussion today. First, the panelists will frame the topic, and then they'll provide their recommendations for advancing US-Taiwan co-production. Then after their first 2 rounds of panel discussion, we'll have a moderated question and answer session with the panelists. So I encourage you, if you would like to ask a question, please do so through askac.org. That's askac.org to inject your question into the discussion. Now, I can't guarantee that we'll get to your question, but we have a pretty good track record of being able to have a good amount of conversation after the initial discussions in our cross-strait seminar events. And so I do encourage you, if you have a question that you'd like to inject into this conversation, use askac.org. So now let's go to our first round of comments from our panelists. And in this round, we'll be focusing on the status of US-Taiwan co-production and the challenges that we see potentially the progress in being able to conduct some co-production. So we'll start first with Lieutenant General Stephen Stick Rudder, U.S. Marine Corps retired, who's currently a non-resident senior fellow in our program, the Atlantic Council's Indo-Pacific Security Initiative. Now, he retired as the commanding general of U.S. Marine Forces Pacific. He was responsible for all marine operations in the Asia-Pacific in this capacity. And before that, he had served as the Indo-Pacific Command's Director of Policy and Plans as the J5. Now, as you can tell by his call sign, Stick's an aviator. Over his career, he exceeded over 5,000 flying hours and received the Distinguished Flying Cross in combat. And before assuming command of Marine Forces Pacific, he managed all Marine aviation aircraft procurement and sustainment programs as the deputy commandant, I should say, of the Marine Corps for Aviation. He continues to serve in the aerospace and defense industry, including as founder of Stick Rudder Enterprises. So, General Rudder, very much looking forward to hearing your comments, and I think it's great to have you here to lead us off. So, over to you, Stick.
Oh, thank you, Marcus, and I'm really honored to be here with some of my good friends and colleagues sharing this discussion this morning. And thanks, Marcus, for everything you do at IPSI, at the Atlantic Council. This is just one of many great forums that you put on. First, I think I'll just begin with saying that the policy is important. And I think if we look at this year, and we can go all the way back to last year with some of the legislation that was passed, the policy momentum is certainly there for a multitude of things. Taiwan historically has been an FMS-only country, but recently we were able to get the Presidential Drawdown Authority, 333 FMF funds, grant allocation, which has never been done before. And also, even when it comes down to training and education, we've been able to up the ability to get Taiwan into our higher level schools at a lower rate. So with that, we've had several other momentous events that lead us into this co-production discussion. Back in April, May, when Dr. LaPlante kind of did a statement of principle for the Indo-Pacific Defense Industrial Base collaboration efforts, he laid out to the Indo-Pacific region that he wanted further collaboration to solve the contested logistics problem, the military readiness problem, and certainly promote regional partnerships. So not only with AUKUS or Japan and the Defense Industrial Cooperation Forum that they have, we had this sweeping policy that allows industry greater maneuver space in this co-production space. In fact, the U.S. government at this point is being our biggest advocate for U.S. industry. So as we speak today, in Hawaii, you've got a meeting called the Piper Project, Partnership for Indo-Pacific Industrial Resilience Project. So countries and industry partners are participating to see where co-production and or repair sustainment can be furthered in several different countries. So I know that I've been honored and privileged to work with Lotta Danielson on the US-Taiwan Business Council, and we take delegations there every year. We just hosted the Defense Forum with Taiwan participants in Philadelphia, and our principal desire is just to connect U.S. industry to Taiwan industry and Taiwan leadership to see what they may need. So with that in mind, I think the door is open to this co-production model. And because we're so ingrained with AUKUS and Japan and Korea already, and we've got this burgeoning trilateral agreement with the Philippines, Japan, and the U.S., Taiwan is in the middle of it saying, I want this. I want to be a partner. Now the question is, how? Now, strategically, having production in Taiwan makes perfect sense, because if you don't have it in country, God forbid a conflict should occur, it's going to be very difficult to get there. So why wouldn't we allow this professionalized, skilled labor force to do co-production, co-sustainment, co-repair, if you will, on our capabilities. So I think that resupply challenges combined with just global challenges with magazine depth, with the ongoing conflicts, it makes sense. And if I go back to our visit this past summer, and I'll just paraphrase some of the leaders, their desire is to build defense and strengthen deterrence. We see that in their increasing budget. I think up to 2.5 now, with all three parties advocating for a 3% increase. Maintain economic strength, which is part of it, and build a stronger international defense network. That's what they need to do. Now, the question is, the U.S. being the biggest partner, can we be the greatest advocate to make this a defense partner in the region? With the political sensitivities to the one China policy and the TRA. I personally think it fits right in with the TRA in the language in there, but some may debate that. So the challenges, and I'll just list out a few and I'll pass on because I only have a few minutes. I think policy, U.S. State Department, Defense, this administration, I think whatever administration comes in next will remain the same, my thought. But we need to make sure that for the U.S. industry point, that we develop a business case for it. Co-production, building a production line, if that's what it is, must entail the numbers required and a monetary value required that allows us to have a business case to stand up a line, train people, machinery, long lead items. On the other case, production line, you have repair capability. There's a great business case to do more F-16 repair inside Taiwan. As a matter of fact, every time we sit down with them, they ask for that. But politically inside the country, relying on FMS is not the right answer for us. Quite honestly, we're late to need on many items, which is creating political pressure. And it's always politically acceptable to have made in Japan, made in Korea, made in India, or made in Taiwan. Politically for them, it makes good sense. So I think that model is there. Now the question is for industry, they'll tell you this. How do I protect my intellectual property? How do I make sure that the red supply chain is excluded from that? How do I make sure that the cyber protection, once we have our information on the net there for repair, is protected? And then, of course, end use monitoring is always important. But in my mind, the area, and I'll finish with this, is ripe for co-production, co-sustainment with Taiwan. The forums that the U.S. government and the US-Taiwan Business Council has presented are meant and have concluded many different co-production agreements. Now the question, what's the next level? And that is where the business and contracting folks need to sit down and develop a business model that works for both countries.
General, thank you very much for that very in-depth explanation of a whole range of considerations. Looking forward to the next round, hearing more about your thoughts on how we can overcome some of these obstacles and how we can make forward progress. So next we'll go to Lotte Danielson, the Vice President of the US-Taiwan Business Council, a nonprofit organization that's dedicated to developing the commercial relationship between the United States and Taiwan. Now, she served as the vice president there since 2003 when she was promoted from being director of corporate affairs. And she's been planning the annual US-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference, which is a platform for bilateral dialogue on Taiwan's national security and defense needs since its inception back in 2002. She's also a non-resident fellow at the National Bureau of Asian Research. So, well, I'm very interested in hearing your thoughts on the challenges and the issues that we have to deal with, the larger context of U.S.-Taiwan co-production.
Thank you so much, Marcus. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thanks to Steve and Tuli as well. It is a pleasure to be here to talk about this very important topic. I think 5 years ago, the idea of co-production really wasn't an issue that was front and center when it comes to U.S.-Taiwan relations. There's been a change recently where both sides appear to be focused on how to make this happen. At the most recent U.S.-Taiwan Defense Conference, which was about 2 weeks now, this was a really key topic, something that we discussed not just in sessions, but also in side meetings at the conference. But I think the question isn't if it will happen, but when it will happen, how it will happen, and which products we are going to be looking to co-produce. We're seeing a couple of first steps happening in the last several weeks, actually, where it appears that the U.S. is evaluating NCIST, one of Taiwan's major production capabilities, for certification to assemble their Stinger missiles, for example. But it is a very complex task, and it has a lot of challenges that we have heard a little bit about from Steve as well. Some of it is political. What will this look like? Was kind of co-production. What will it look like under the next U.S. administration? Depending on the president, it might look different. We'll probably see some continuity, but some of the details might look different. And then, of course, in Taiwan, the question is about resources. There's a very complex and contentious domestic political environment in Taiwan. And how will the resources be allocated from within Taiwan to these types of co-production projects? As Steve touched on, it's also business related. We know this is a policy priority for the United States and for Taiwan, but as Steve mentioned, we must build a business case as well for U.S. companies. Does co-production with Taiwan make sense from a shareholder perspective? Is it cost effective? What impact will it have on existing suppliers? And then will it be possible to get the export licenses to co-produce in Taiwan? All these are questions that need to be answered. There's also some issues on Taiwan on business side. Right now it's a fairly small group of companies that are set up to take advantage of these type of co-production abilities. You got NCIST, AIDC, CSBC, but we don't have all that many smaller companies that may be set up to take advantage of co-production issues. And so it narrows the range of possible partners in Taiwan, in particular on things like drones, which is where we're really seeing the focus being for both sides at the moment. And then, of course, there's the overarching challenges. There's a complex China issues surrounding politics on the One China policy and so on across the globe. The question is there a market for co-produced items from Taiwan? Will there be places around the world that would be willing to sort of step up to the plate and buy things that have been produced in Taiwan? That's a good question. And I also think there's some challenges on the U.S. side. We've seen sort of a lack of ambition on FMS. Over the last several years, it's been mostly sustainment and munitions. Is that something that we'll see again for co-production? Will they sort of tinker at the edges, be a bit more on those types of programs, or are we going to see something that is a bit more ambitious? And if it's just tinkering around the edges, will that be enough to help build a Taiwan defense industrial base? So there's lots of things to discuss, and I look forward to continuing to talk about these issues.
Thanks so much. Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate, too, that you bring a lot of the private sector perspective here, understanding that this is an issue set where governments can set policies and they can drive priorities and push a direction. But at the end of the day, the execution of co-production comes from the private sector rather than from the public sector to actually execute these ideas and to make this sort of more efficient and effective approach possible. So next, we're going to a return speaker from our cross-strait and beyond seminar series. So Dr. Wu, thank you for taking the time to join us again. So Dr. Suli Wu is an associate research fellow in the Division of Defense Strategy and Resources at Taiwan's Institute for National Defense and Security Research, INDSR. A great institution, of course, that we've visited in our annual delegations of the Atlantic Council to Taiwan. He teaches at the Graduate Institute of International Security in Taiwan's National Defense University, and his research interests include defense strategy, defense industry, and military affairs. Before retiring as a captain from the Taiwanese Navy, he served as assistant professor in the Department of Information Management at the Republic of China Naval Academy. He was a visiting fellow at the Royal United Services Institute in London, RUSI, and also a research fellow at the Center for Strategic Studies at Taiwan's National Defense University. And so, Doctor, really looking forward to hearing your perspective from on the ground in Taiwan. Obviously, this is a very important issue set for Taiwan's national security. So, Doctor, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Fox. Good evening, everybody. It's my pleasure to be invited to join this discussion. Based on the topic of this, we are talking about co-production. I would like to address first that how Taiwan side has ever working on these issues. We all know that because in order to cope with the challenges in a battlefield and build a strong deterrent combat capability, Taiwan's Ministry of National Defense established the Defense Innovation Group, DIG, this February, with a reference to the United States Defense Innovation Unit, DIU, to evaluate innovative concepts and introduce commercial technologies to help enhance overall defense capabilities. The DIG priority will focus on the unmanned vehicles, counter UAV systems, AI targeting recognition, autonomous navigation and command control assistance. And DIG will also pay close attention to the fields of communications, cyber warfare, laser and high energy microwaves. The establishment of DIG has opened up the opportunity of co-production for the US and Taiwan. At the US-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference held last month, Taiwan's Vice Minister of National Defense General Xi Yanpu called on Taiwan to accelerate the development of defense industry capabilities following the example of Japan and Australia that have jointly licensed production. U.S. Deputy Secretary of State, Mr. Kurt Campbell, said that the joint production of military hardware with important allies is a solution to the national defense production bottleneck. Taiwan's industrial base possesses good technology, talent, and high quality. The National Zhongshan Institute of Science and Technology and the private manufacturers have considerable technology and production capabilities. Taiwan and the United States need to deepen the bilateral cooperation mechanism and communication platform, make Taiwan and the United States become becomes a defense industry partners, strengthen the resilience of the bilateral defense industry, and achieve a win-win situation. Besides that, I still have some challenges to work on. Just like General Rogers and also the two speakers just mentioned. Beyond that, there's two points I would like to address the importance of that. One is about security. I know that the U.S. side partner always pay a most important priority on the security issues. So how to set up a trustworthy and reliable supply chain security mechanism is one of the first priority for both government, also for the companies. And the other one is about U.S. might need to support high inclusion in the U.S. DoD defense industry strategy for international cooperation mechanism. So the co-production can be true. And building consolidate infrastructure with the proper regulations and the management of defense industry development and the co-production that is fully aligned with the US and the Taiwan national security interest. I think that's the important challenge we're still facing. Thank you.
Doctor, really appreciate that. The very helpful perspective, understanding that Taiwan is really a key partner for the United States defense industry, and it's very important for us to understand the perspective from Taiwan to be able to do what we can to promote these efforts and advance shared interest in countering the rising threat from the People's Republic of China. So I think we have some good context here now from all three of our speakers on the challenges that we'll face in moving forward with co-production, but also I think some good explanation of the reasons, the justifications, the advantages of moving forward with co-production on a pretty significant scale. So in order to make this possible, however, we do have to overcome some of the obstacles that were described and look to specific measures that we can take to move forward. And so I'd like to ask each of the speakers in turn to provide concisely just their top recommendations on how we could advance co-production between Taiwan and the United States. So first I'll go to you, General Rudder. Really interested in your maybe top three recommendations that you'd suggest we move forward on quickly.
Boyd, top three. Okay, let me just begin with, for the policy side, I know we've made great strides. You know, having said all that, I would say it's important to act fast. We are not the only country that's producing asymmetric or capable weapon systems out there. We compete every day in every country with Israel, France, and Turkey, and not necessarily China, but in other areas, certainly we compete with China that has a very cost-effective solution for many, many things. So the longer we wait to do this, the longer we provide hurdles, whether it's policy or it's a contracting piece. So I'll get to that in a minute. Other countries have stepped in ahead of us on a multitude of forms. So fast first. Then it's this asymmetric first conventional capability. And I think Zuli just talked about this with this. In the US, we had this DIUX, and we were relying on DIUX to really have contracting vehicles for this high-tech, up-and-coming capabilities that have an asymmetric advantage. Good news is Taiwan has stood up their DIO capability, but because this technology is moving so fast, it's not necessarily mainstream with our services. Now, I think one of the recommendations that came out last year that is being done is a DIUX person is being fielded into AIT to help with this burgeoning technical capability. So having said that, you know, F-16s, M1s, Mark 48s, AMRAAM, those weapon systems that are in the FMSQ are ripe for negotiations for co-production sustainment. The other capabilities, which have valuable asymmetric capability, and I use AeroVironment with their Switchblade 300s and 600s. Obviously, asymmetric capability in many places around the world. And recently, if you read the press, those that are being fielded to Ukraine. But this capability being co-produced in Taiwan is we're going to require State Department policy to be able to let AeroVironment get in there and even get into the basics of negotiations. I use that as one example because loitering munitions are becoming, just like taking your weapon into combat, you should, every battalion, company, platoon level are taking loitering munitions into combat. Those new technologies, we have to find a way to fast track the ability for countries like AeroVironment to go in there and negotiate. Now, as far as the supply chain, red supply chain, and trying to keep them out of your intellectual property once you get there, or intellectual property for being distributed to other areas, I think it was recommended at the last US-Taiwan Business Council meeting in Philly that we probably need a third-party cyber overwatch capabilities, kind of like end user monitoring, to help and be assured that U.S. intellectual property is not being leaked out by just cyber intrusions, which happen, on the minute in Taiwan. Probably most cyber intruded countries in the world, and they do a good job protecting themselves. It's just that is always a concern for industry. Then and a lot have mentioned this. So the numbers have to work. In many cases, when we do co-production, the numbers work because we can take that system and export it in some way, shape, or form, or provide that outside of Taiwan if needed. So the production numbers are up. So export one Taiwan policy, U.S. policy, and then the ability to protect other countries from PRC coercion for accepting a trade or some sort of defense article exchange with Taiwan. That's a key issue for a lot of countries because we're all intertwined with the Chinese economy in some way, shape, or form. We all are still. From the U.S. side, somewhere in there, we have to put stuff on contract. And ladies and gentlemen, there is not enough contracting officers in DOD to conclude the contracts in the manner in which time is of essence. In some cases, contracting is the longest pole in the tent. Now, everybody's negotiating for the best price. I got it. It's a part of business, but we don't have enough contracting officers that have the ability to dig into this topic in particular. And this is aside from the FMS process. And Lotta was being very generous when she's talked about the FMS process between the U.S. and Taiwan. And I don't want to put her on the spot, but she's the expert. We have not been a very good FMS partner. So with continuity of FMS on a yearly basis, without going year or 2 or 3 years without doing an FMS case, the Bush administration did it, the Obama administration did it, Trump did not. The Biden administration is very, very low on the FMS case load. You have to provide continuity to industry. It goes back to the numbers. So whatever we do, much like we're doing with the U.S. business case for U.S. defense, I think a multi-year agreement is the way to go. That gives industry a way. So I'm not doing a one-year contract, and waiting for Congress to appropriate funds, or I'm waiting for Taiwan to appropriate funds. We lay this in either through a special budget with Taiwan or through a multi-year with the U.S., the congressional piece, and we allow the numbers and the stability of long lead items, supply, production to take hold, so it doesn't get interrupted because of a political fumble somewhere. Dare I say a fumble? You know, it's football season, so I'll just say fumble. So I'll end there and say that, you know, some of this is mechanical. Some of it is policy and just the administrative actions to make it happen, which are slow. But I think if we give if industry has the authorities and the confidence that when they enter an agreement from both Taiwan and U.S. government, it's a win-win for both. Thank you, Marcus.
General, thanks so much. Those are some great recommendations. A lot to work with there on a way to make it, as you say, a win-win for Taiwan, for the United States, for the governments and militaries, and for the private sector as well. Win-win all around. Everyone wins except for, of course, the PRC, who would be counterbalanced by success in this approach. So now let's go to Lata. Really interested in your thoughts. And again, really, if you could focus on the key recommendations here about what we can do to move forward on this approach to overcome some of these obstacles, take advantage of the opportunities. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I appreciate that. And thanks, Steve. I do think it's going to be something that we have to be patient about to get it right. It's going to take time. We're going to think ahead and try to be ambitious. This is a long-term kind of project to get this done. But I do think Taiwan is really well positioned to work with the U.S. on co-production. We can model it on the tech industry cooperation, where Taiwan has been for a long time a trusted partner. It's really good to see Taiwan being included in the Piper project, like Stephen mentioned, where other countries, 12 other countries, or 12 countries, including Taiwan, is talking about some of these issues. And I think it's important for Taiwan to be able to learn from other projects. So I think the U.S. is working with Japan to produce missiles, to working with India to produce fighter jet engines and so on. And they can really potentially learn from those types of projects. I think from an industry perspective, this is something that my U.S. government friends might push back on, but I do think improving the licensing process for export controls or exporting technology is really going to be a key piece of this. Industry says it just takes too long, it's too bureaucratic, it's a push and pull between industry and government, and it's something that needs to be streamlined. And I think this was echoed by Vice Minister Xu of Taiwan at the most recent US-Taiwan Defense Industry Conference. It is a very important piece in trying to allow co-production to go ahead. On the business side, I think government can help companies better understand this opportunity and help develop the business case a little bit better. But in Taiwan, I also think that there are companies like Foxconn and MyTac and some of the other very good technology companies who have extensive systems integration experience. They have their R&D capabilities, manufacturing capabilities, and supply chains and so on. The question then becomes, how do we bring them in? Because they can really be a part of the solution. How can we bring them in? How can we encourage them to participate in the defense sector, where they can apply all their very well-developed skills towards the defense? But that must also include smaller companies where we have to build industry participation from the ground up. I'm looking particularly at, for example, the drone industry, where smaller companies in Taiwan can really play a good role there. But what that's gonna look like is really to be seen for the moment. It's going to require communications at the very highest levels between the U.S. and Taiwan, something that's not always easy to do, but that is really going to be something we have to focus on, and focus on partnerships and trying to build it together as a long-term project, not just a short-term one.
Thanks very much. And I think this theme that you mentioned about viewing this as a long-term process and having patience really also ties in very well with Stick's point about multi-year agreements, right? And the need to be able to play the long game here and not have to be constantly chasing, 1 year at a time. So I think there's a lot of synergy between those recommendations, but it's great to see it from two different perspectives. So those are a couple of views from the U.S. side of the equation. So now let's go to Sue Lee. I'd like to hear your thoughts on some recommendations of how we could move forward. And these can be recommendations, to be fair, for Taiwan itself or for the U.S. government, for U.S. entities. So certainly welcome your thoughts, your recommendations. So over to you, Dr. Wu.
Okay, thank you. I'm very glad that Lothar just mentioned about the Foxconn. So here after that, I'm going to talk about the company like Foxconn can do what kind of job or benefit to the defense industry. Both Taiwan and the United States want to promote the cooperation on drones and get rid of China's military pressure and or supply chain dependence on China. Taiwan industry can provide non-rate parts and have a very good original equipment manufacturer or OEM, and the original design manufacturer ODM, which is a Foxconn type or MyTech type company, provides that kind of service experience. The United States defense industry can adopt OEM business model in Taiwan to co-produce what Taiwan defense needs. ODM can also be applied in Taiwan to provide joint design and development and manufacturing services for United States defense industry needs. And it would be beneficial to invite Taiwan electronic manufacturing services, even EMS industry, just like Foxconn, who have a successful experience in ODM, and a customer secret protection to help the establishment of the defense industry, especially for the drone market, which requires low cost, high volume with required quality. I also want to mention another one is about Israel. In the 1980s, the United States agreed that Israel invested about 26% of United States military aid on Israel's own defense industry. Now Israel defense industry has become a major global player. In the development of national defense industry, Israel military technology has been continuously improved, and it has even become an important supplier of weapons, parts, and components in the United States. Israel exports of weapons and equipment to the United States have reached 20% of Israel arms exports. Taiwan should seek to use some of United States military assistance resources, such as Israel's up to 26%, to improve the technological quality of Taiwan's defense industry through co-production with joint research and development to introduce of new technologies. The United States and the Taiwan government work together to help Taiwan's defense industry integrate into the United States defense supply chain system to build a stable and a lasting market demand. So that's the ideas I would like to suggest. Thank you.
Oh, that's spectacular. No, I really appreciate those recommendations and ideas, and I think you've given some great thoughts, both from the perspective of what Taiwan can do, and from what the United States can do, and what private sector and what governments can do. So this has really been a very helpful round of discussion. Appreciate the comments by all three of you. And so now we're going to transition to the question and answer. And so we've already got a series of Q&As through us through to us under the askac.org, but we still have room to address some additional questions. So I encourage you to go to askac.org to inject your questions there, and you're welcome to do so either anonymously if you like, or also you can cite your name in there and feel free to inject your a little bit of context too, if you have some background to your question. We can also read that as well as we use some of these comments and questions in the group. But I would like to first go using moderator privilege to a member of the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative who could not join us here today due to some technical limitations. But Andrew Brown, who I mentioned earlier, is a non-resident fellow with the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative who led our recent issue briefing on co-production and production diplomacy in the Indo-Pacific. And so as part of the event that we ran to roll out this issue brief, we had a discussion with a range of different experts, including an Australian diplomat, the deputy chief of mission to the United States at the time. And one of the phrases that came up that he raised was the idea of deterrence through production. And the idea of production diplomacy actually being able to promote a more effective deterrence, particularly of the PRC in the Indo-Pacific, is that production essentially is deterrence. And this also came up in the development of the issue brief itself, the potential role that a co-production approach or increased production in general and stockpiles could play in deterrence. And so Andy asks, can you please discuss how co-production in Taiwan could impact deterrence, specifically how it could potentially affect the PRC's shorter term and longer term calculus regarding Taiwan? And he says, thank you. So we could go to the same order unless anyone else would like to volunteer to go first. But if not, I'll go to Stick for his thoughts. And I know you've spent a lot of time, General, thinking about deterrence in the Indo-Pacific in your various capacities. So would really be interested to hear your perspective on how co-production could impact deterrence.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. Deterrence can be widely defined, but essentially, if I were to break it down and just a pure layman's, is having the capability forward that makes your adversary say, not today, or with the ability to gain the advantage in numbers and sustain numbers, not today, tomorrow, the next day. And maybe in your professional, your professional background with Korea, you could potentially make a case there where that deterrence model over the years has been defined in many different areas. Now in Taiwan, you have this large island surrounded by water. So I think deterrence is measured in one, how do you have sufficient numbers to create a deterrence value? Deterrence value is you've got enough capability in your magazine to sustain yourself, dare I say, months, years. I mean, if we look at Ukraine, years. And the ability to sustain yourself means you're able to sustain a production model that regenerates capability. So I think if we look at this asymmetric capability and to thwart an amphibious landing or an air assault, or even on the national side, food resilience and energy resilience, which is another topic altogether. But I'll come back to defense. How do you create a deterrence model that disallows an amphibious assault? And to do that, you have to be able to generate numbers that are probably not there today. So co-production would generate the numbers, and if you distribute this co-production to be able to continue to generate and stockpile capability, stockpile skill labor in areas where you can continue to produce, I think that becomes a deterrence value in and of itself. But it's got to be the right capability that you're generating. I'll just make a general statement on Taiwan in particular. They rely on the Chongqing Institute, NTSIST, to generate some of their high-end weapons. But I would offer that each and every drone company needs to be at full production, day-night production levels. And I think you could say the same thing for the United States. There's probably not one drone company that can generate the mass required. So we need everybody. And that's a change of thought. So for Taiwan, my recommendation for change of thought for deterrence model is you have every single company capable of making drones, attack drones, ISR drones, USV, surface vehicle boat drones, UUV drones, put them at full capacity with partnership with US companies, and you would create deterrence value of capacity, mass, and asymmetric capability.
General, thanks very much. And this actually reminds me of some of the work that we've been doing as part of the Tiger Project on war and deterrence in the Indo-Pacific. And it becomes clear when you look at deterrence, and I think as Andy's comments alluded, as his question alluded, there's this need to have near-term capacity, to have that mass that you referred to be able to defeat an attack, to particularly to defeat an effort to overtake the island through a fait accompli over a very short period of time. But at the same time, we also need the stockpiles. We need, as you say, the magazine depth, and the resilience within our infrastructure and the ability to produce over time if that conflict were to transition to a sustained conflict rather than a so-called sharp war. And so much of our work has militated toward the idea that even if you can defeat the initial attack, you still need to be able to sustain the defense over the long haul against an adversary, particularly one that has the production capacity of the PRC. So those comments are really, really helpful context. And I'd like to ask Lata if she's got any thoughts next, and then we'll go to Suli if they have anything they would like to add about how this co-production approach could impact deterrence in terms of both the short-term and the longer-term calculus of the PRC to conduct aggression against Taiwan. So, Lata, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to associate myself with Steve's comments. I do think that is a very big part of deterrence, is being able to have those forward deployed items on the island and not have to ship them or try to get them to Taiwan at need. But I also think that's part of it is the political will, right? If you're working very hard on trying to get co-production done, it really shows the political will from the United States that they're willing to support Taiwan, willing to work with Taiwan, and that has a deterrence effort all its own. But I do think, forward deployment of items on the island is very, very important.
Thanks, Lata. I appreciate it. Now that on-island capability, I think that it's a very important factor that we don't often talk about. Suli, over to you.
Yes, I think there's a one word called resilience. I think the deterrence, actually, we are talking about co-production. The final goal is to try to increase Taiwan's national resilience once there's a PRC attack. And talking about a stockpile, we know that on the island, we have a lot of mountain areas. The space might not be quite good enough for all the stockpiles, but the capability to keep doing the production in the wartime is very, very crucial. So I think in the peacetime, we need to create this kind of co-production capability in Taiwan and keep supply for all those needs for the manufacturing. Then Taiwan can have the capability to supply itself during the wartime. We know that Taiwan, just like General Rogers said, Taiwan is an island. The supply channel is from the sea, from the air. It's very, very easily to be, I shouldn't say blockade, because we will have the capability to try to secure our supply line, but that will be cost. That will cost a lot. So we need to create that kind of capability on the island. And also the other one is talking about in time. Take the Russia-Ukraine war as an example. Since the invasion started on the 2022, Ukraine always facing a problem is in time, because all those supply ammunitions, weapons cannot supply in time. So they suffered. The people and civilians also suffered. So we need to avoid that kind of situation happening in Taiwan. So that's why we should have the co-production, and we should have the capability to be built on the island. So I think the government here is fully support the idea. And we also try to work in with the private company, especially for the drone. Just as I mentioned before, maybe currently there's no big company like Foxconn or others involved. But I think the government should try to invite them with or encourage them to be able to join this drone production, co-production opportunity. I think it will be also a good business for them. So that's the idea I will think about. Thank you.
Suli, thank you. No, that's very helpful. So I think this has been a great lead off to the discussion of looking at all these factors. And I've noticed that there's a whole series of questions coming in that are all overlapping in general in their focus on looking at the third country factors related to co-production between the U.S. and Taiwan. And so I'll try and capture some of these, and we'll go through another round to address these. But before I do that, I also wanted to remind all of our participants that you can go to askac.org to ask your question. We still have some time, and especially since I'll be grouping some of these questions together, I think we'll have an opportunity to do at least one more round of questions after this next one. So I would like to, again, group these questions a bit together. They're coming from different sources. So one line of questioning overall here is the co-production question here. Should co-production between the United States and Taiwan be strictly bilateral, or should other countries be engaged in this effort? If other countries should be involved, which countries? So that's the broader overarching question. But there's two specific questions underneath this that perhaps you could address in your answers as we go through. And one is that would the co-production model or idea be different from AUKUS, the Quad, et cetera? Can it be addressed solely on its own, or is it become an extension of some of the mechanisms that we've already had? So that's another question related. And then a third question that's related to the first two gets even more specific. With the India-U.S. partnership signed in September regarding semiconductors, what sort of role could India play in this context? Could they become involved in something that resembles a trilateral agreement that includes Taiwan? And so those are some of the different elements of the broader question about the third parties potentially being involved in U.S.-Taiwan co-production. I noticed even that, Suli, you mentioned the idea of actually not just third parties being involved, but actually the third parties, customers essentially of U.S.-Taiwan co-production. So let's change up the order a little bit, and we'll go in reverse. Suli, we'll start with you and ask your thoughts on how the international aspect of co-production beyond the U.S. and Taiwan could fit together. And again, a lot of different directions we could take this. Would be very interested in your thoughts.
Yes, definitely. I think the defense industry is a kind of an ecosystem that needs a lot of supplies. The supply chain might involve the third parties, not just the U.S. and Taiwan. the parts can be available or provided by other countries as well. So of course, there's definitely other countries will be involved in a co-production ecosystem. That's the first thing. And about India's, I think the most important thing is India has talent. People in India, people are very talented. As we know that in Taiwan, some of the high-tech companies right now try to recruit India talent to come to Taiwan to join our industry, to participate in our industry. So India definitely has that kind of capability to provide a talent that the industry need for that. But talk about the chip production you just mentioned, I think that's just the early age. We probably already know that chip manufacturing is not so easy. It's kind of a complex things. It involves a lot of things. It also include ecosystem, a lot of suppliers. Not only the supply, but also the people involved in the manufacturing process. So we already see some success in the US, in Japan and Germany. India might be still in the early age, but they got this kind of ambitions to pursue that kind of goal. Maybe in the future, we can have a cooperation between the countries, or to try to get some kind of agreement to enhance our defense industry. Thanks.
All right, thank you, Suli. Appreciate it. So a lot of different ways, again, we can take this conversation with these three interrelated questions. The overarching question on the role that third countries can play related to US-Taiwan defense co-production, and then specifically looking at how this relates to existing frameworks like AUKUS, like the Quad. Is this something that can be woven in there? And then the third very specific question on the US-India angle and the potential for India to actually play a role in facilitating US-Taiwan co-production. And so I'll go to Lotte next, and then to Stick to wrap us up on this topic. So Lotte, over to you.
I do think that it's important to bring in other countries. U.S. allies can really play an important role in this. The question always becomes, the United States can make their own decisions, and they are, if they step up and lead the way, it's very possible that other countries will be willing to then step up and do the same. But it's the issue of China. What will China say? How will that impact the decisions that our allies make on working with Taiwan on co-production? If the United States steps up and does it by themselves, so it's a bilateral thing to start, that's more likely to get allies involved as well. And that there are others, other things that we are working with on our allies. So the IPEF, for example, is a sort of trade agreement that we're working on with our allies in the region, and that has a supply chain component and building resiliency component. It's not something that we're working on with Taiwan specifically, but we're working with our allies on these types of issues, and bringing those types of trilateral, multilateral agreements into the forefront can be important. Like we talked about the Piper project, I think that's kind of where we're seeing the United States put their focus. When it comes to India, Taiwan is very much working with India on things like semiconductors and on talent, as Suli said. It is very early in the process at the moment, and so it's really hard to say what kind of role they will play. But Taiwan is really interested in working with working with India on a variety of topics, and co-production and defense will definitely be one of them, I think.
Thank you very much. It's very, very helpful perspective. And now let's go to Stick. And Stick, your thoughts on this question of the third country potential roles in US-Taiwan co-production, particularly how it might fit in with existing frameworks and the US-India angle specifically.
Yeah, I would just offer to the audience, just go ahead and Google, Taiwan drone interaction, and you'll see several different countries already there and operating and have signed agreements and are doing those. I think it goes back to, if not us, it's them. But more importantly, maybe it's all of us for the capacity. But, from the policy side, we've got to, one, try to bring other countries together within their political climate. Because again, just about everybody, except for a few nations, have a one China policy, are very embedded in the Chinese economy and the value of the import-export balance. So to date, most of those interactions with other countries have been, bilateral coming in. I'll just say that. It's mostly bilateral. But other countries, NATO countries, are there, and non-NATO countries are there too, in the drone industry field. And again, just go to open source, you'll see, who's doing what there. I think under the current structures of, say, like AUKUS, I think you mentioned AUKUS, everybody mentions AUKUS or August. I say AUKUS because I think it's going to be AUKUS pretty soon. I think they're trying to scoop as many people into those agreements as possible because it makes sense. With Taiwan, it's a little more politically sensitive. Countries are doing it. There's been more dialogue. And I'll even say for the European countries that have heretofore not entered into just basic discussions on economy and trade with China, or excuse me, with the Republic of China, are doing that. So I think that's a good sign. Whether you can scoop it all into a quad, trilat, multilat, I think that's going to take time. And the United States would have to, really be aggressive in putting that together. I don't think there's anybody else capable of really putting that together. And as far as the India, India, I'll mention one thing about India, and it's really, it covers a lot of different countries when it comes to production, defense articles in general. Depending upon what capability, whether you take the broad brush of India's capabilities, 76% aggregate, sometimes more when it comes to artillery and vehicles, are Russian. So when we talk about putting this production model together broadly within a global scope, countries aren't going to get their Sukhois or MiGs at the rate that they thought. They're not getting their artillery, their ammunition, and their rolling stock vehicles at the rate that they thought. Although I say that knowing that the Russia industry base is cranking out capability. Some could say strained, but they're still able to generate, but not generate in the global market, which they dominated in some countries. So I think the ability for Taiwan to generate and contribute not only to the defense of Taiwan, which is, I think, very important to their national security, our security, Indo-Pacific security, but it's the ability for them to be a partner globally. And to do that, you got to make a really good product. You got to have the export rules that allow Taiwan to export that capability. And then you have to allow the receiving country for it to be cost effective and able to receive a Taiwan-made product in the defense world. So there's a lot of things intertwined in there. And I think we heard one story, Lada and I, when we were in Philadelphia at the US-Taiwan Business Council, is that there's some countries, they'd love to buy stuff, but, Chinese drones are really cheap. And you got to compete in that market space. So numbers are important. because that means you can drive down costs a little bit. Obviously, capability is important, but there are a lot of companies that rely on these Chinese drones. So you got to make a better product, and you got to make it just as cheap and competitive. Thanks, Marcus.
Yeah, Stick, this actually reminds me a bit of my own study of the South Korean defense industry and how important it was for South Korea to transition to being a defense exporter, and not just a exporter of low-end equipment, but of higher-end major weapon systems, to enable South Korea's defense industry to go to the next level. And given the nature of the challenge that both South Korea and Taiwan face from an aggressive neighbor, building up that defense industry and then exporting defense articles, at first, I think, at first glance to some, it might seem counterintuitive. Why are you building things and then sending them to other countries? But as you have alluded, developing that capacity domestically to the point where you're actually able to export allows you to reduce the marginal cost of the items, and then also allows you to develop the investment in your research and development, in your building your capacity, so that your own production for purposes of deterring and potentially defeating your adversary becomes that much more capable. And so I certainly don't see that South Korea's defense industry would have gotten to where it is today if it hadn't been for its tremendous success in defense exports and its international partnerships. And so perhaps there's some lessons to be learned there from Taiwan, I think, as you're alluding. So this has really been a great discussion on the international aspects, and particularly the third country aspects. And it actually ties in, though, some of the comments to one of the other questions that was asked. And I'm going to go to Lata on this one first, since she hit this one head on. And that is this concern about potential PRC economic retaliation when there is co-production, when there is partnerships with Taiwan, particularly with the defense industries. This is a threat potentially to the economies of the countries involved, but it can also be a threat to the individual companies involved, and specifically to the supply chains to be able to continue this production. And so, Lata, do you have any specific thoughts about this question here of how do we handle these threats, particularly the threats to supply chains, when the PRC responds, potentially retaliates economically to these co-production efforts?
Yeah, I mean, it is the $1 million question, right? What will happen if a company and a country participates in supply chain, participates in co-production in Taiwan? How will China react? But I think at some point you have to say, well, we're going to do what we are going to do because it's good for us. We can't predict what China will do. We have to step up and do what's right for us and what's right for Taiwan in order to continue to move forward. Whatever China decides to do, that's sort of out of our hands. And so you're seeing a lot of times where China has been pushing on Taiwan for things like, pineapple exports and a variety of other economic pushes to try to control them. They have not necessarily been super successful in the long run. Often they have kind of backed up on it at the end. And we're seeing some of the things that the PRC is doing, like putting sanctions on companies in the United States for working with Taiwan. The most recent round of sanctions were announced just a couple of weeks ago. But a lot of the companies that were sanctioned don't have any protection at all in China anyway. So it feels a lot like a lot of rhetoric. And not a lot of follow-up, at least at the moment. And so I think that is something that we have to kind of keep in mind. But you can't handle China. You can't decide what they're going to do. You have to only sort of move forward and work with your partners to do what's right for you, and then deal with whatever comes at the end. I think that's the way to do it.
Yeah, it is a good point that the threat of this sort of response actually seems to work much better for the PRC in practice than when they actually execute some sort of retaliation. And I think there's some great examples there, as you were alluding, where countries end up hesitating because they're afraid of PRC economic retaliation. But then when they move forward, they find that maybe the damage that the PRC can inflict is not as great as they might have feared. And then, of course, it actually ends up solidifying a domestic political will to move forward, because no country wants to be bullied by Beijing, and certainly no people wants to be in a position where they're always beholden to the Chinese Communist Party for the political decisions and the strategic decisions that their country has to make. That's what's best for their own security. And so I think that your points are very, very helpful context. So now let's go to Suli. What are your thoughts, given that Taiwan itself is so often under the gun, under a target from PRC economic coercion? What do you think about how we could deal with and handle the threats to supply chains when you look at the potential for PRC retaliation or efforts to disrupt this co-production?
Yes, I think that probably that's the reason why the company like Foxconn were not to show the willingness to join the defense industry, because those big companies have lots of assets in the mainland. They have a production line factories in the mainland, but we also observe that since the COVID-19, a lot of companies right now are doing some kind of de-risking work, try to divert their investment out of China. Of course, they were not totally evacuated from that. But the point is, in Taiwan, if you want to do in the defense industry business, probably the companies or businesses shouldn't have any connection with China, which means the companies doing the defense industry here in Taiwan must be a total newly built up with the help of from the government. Try to give some assistance on the resources. Also, they can leverage all those intellectual knowledge from those big companies who are doing very well on the mass production at a low cost. Also, manufacturing process, engineering, R&D, about the quality control. The defense industry can get some ideas from those companies. But those companies probably were not involved personally or into the industry itself, but they can provide help. So I think that's another way that the defense industry co-production, the way we can go. So the people here actually just mentioned about the pineapple things. We actually under tremendous pressure from the PRC. They are using the economic pressure as a tool, try to influence the people here in Taiwan, especially during the election period time. So we are under attack every day about cyber warfare, as well as misinformation, disinformation, that type of things. People here has a capability right now to identify the true and false of those kind of messaging. So I think the people have a capability to deal with it, and the company leaders, while they're doing a business, they also will consider the risk when they try to get involved into the defense industry. And the government will definitely to support their decision, try to get rid of all those pressures from the PRC. Thanks.
So thank you very much. So it's a combination of market forces and partnerships, and as well as government backing, really, that will allow us to deal with this challenge. I think that's great, a great set of comments. Stick, I think this is going to be probably our last major question that we're going to be able to answer. So we'll go to you. Before we do that, I just want to let the panelists know that we'll have an opportunity to give a very, very brief, concise closing comment, less than a minute, before we close the session after we hear Stick's answer to this question. So, General, over to you.
Yeah, the Chinese coercion throughout especially in the ASEAN countries, a lot of economic coercion, bad loans, but they're able to make it work because they show up with, suitcases full of money and a lot of labor, and they're able to make a lot of promises that sound promising at first, and then, not so good once you got to pay off the loan. TPP was not perfect, but I would offer that in a way to prevent PRC coercion would be to have some sort of Asia-Pacific economic effort plan that allows investments in the right area, allows the freedom of U.S. industry to either build ports, build airfields, sell equipment to countries that we don't have access to today. And, Indonesia, Malaysia, critical markets. Thailand, I know we've been a long-standing ally, clawing our way back out of how we treated them during their military coup, where, we kind of stood aside and the PRC moved in. We've got to be consistent on countries, and we've got to have some sort of economic plan that allows greater investment at a rapid pace to outturn the PRC with their investment model. It may not be possible, but again, the TPP wasn't perfect, but I would offer a TPP plan would help that economic coercion take at least some of the sting off a decision to go with a U.S. product or U.S. effort or vote on an ASEAN Council on something, or make a statement and not getting, penalized. I'll just finish this by we talk about Asia Pacific a lot, but historically, the Italian ITS Cavour patrolled in the South China Sea recently, pulled into port in Subic Bay in the Philippines. German ship and oiler steamed through the Taiwan Straits and then pulled into port into Philippines. And that's a lot of it's based on a 1974 agreement that they made with Germany years ago. So not only for the U.S. to have an economic plan like the TPP or TPP-like, but bringing the European and other global leaders, economic leaders, into Asia to provide the confidence that if in some way, in some cases, a country had to decouple from a PRC product, a PRC economic event or contract that they had to break, there's some cushion on that. Thanks, Marcus.
General, thank you. All right, and so now we'll go to Sue Lee for under a minute, just your final thoughts here as we bring this to a close. Anything additional you want to emphasize or share just very quickly? You're muted.
Sorry. I just want to emphasize that a co-production not just a benefit to Taiwan itself only, it's also beneficial to the U.S. and the allies in the world that try to sustain their freedom and democracy. So I think that's important, especially currently the world is under some kind of a conflict. So the capabilities can be enhanced through this co-production policy. Thanks.
Suli, thank you very much. That's a great way to wrap up this session. Lotta, on to you.
Yeah, I just want to say I'm quite optimistic. It feels like this is really a push from both sides. They're willing to make compromises. They're willing to work together to get this done. And there's a lot of enthusiasm within the US defense industry to work with Taiwan and to try to do production. I mean, we've had so many new companies that have come to us and said that, they want to help Taiwan. They want to see what they can do. And so I'm very, very optimistic about what we can do. It's going to take time. It's going to be hard work, but I think that we're going to get there at some point.
So thanks. That's a great optimistic note. And then, John Rudder, over to you. Just again, brief comment just to bring us home before I wrap up the session.
Yeah, I think if we believe 2027 is still some sort of date to anchor speed of policy, continuity of policy, continuity of FMS, continuity of funding is critical. And then I want to end with just this, is that it's not all about the PRC. It's about PRC, Russia, North Korea, and Iran in this collusion of capabilities helping each other. I think we need to make sure that we understand that, because that is a factor in the combat zones that we see in Europe, and that we see in the Middle East. And my sense is, because 3 of those countries are a factor in Asia Pacific already, that will be an element of simultaneity. So this co-production isn't just some nice to have thing. This co-production is something that's required to make the Asia Pacific safe and secure. So with all that, my plea would be to our policymakers, our leadership, is give industry confidence that we have continuity of policy direction, and for Congress, please pass the budget on time. I know you're working hard up there for it, but we'd appreciate that as well. And that applies to our international partners as well, because that budget is tied up in that. Thanks, Marcus.
Hey, General, thank you very much. And thanks to all of our panelists for some excellent comments, and a great way to end the conversation. A somewhat ominous warning from General Rudder, but also I think some great positive ways ahead to counter the threat that we're facing. And co-production, it's not just a nice to have. I think that's a great note to end the session on. So a few key themes that we saw in today's discussion, that we heard in today's discussion: the importance of broader communication on co-production, the challenges, but the real opportunities that we see here, the need to refine our tactics and techniques for approaching this, the potential value of third countries and their ability to contribute to co-production, but also as a market for co-production, and the ability to provide resilience against PRC retaliation to enable that, the need for this sort of co-production to be competitive in the market space, and the need to counter the PRC's efforts to intimidate countries and companies from participating in co-production, and the PRC efforts to compromise technologies and supply chains. So this is neither the beginning nor the end of our discussion of US-Taiwan defense co-production and related important issues, including the broader look at production diplomacy and co-production within the Indo-Pacific and between the U.S. and its Indo-Pacific partners. To learn more about our work at the Indo-Pacific Security Initiative, please check out our website, including not just our initiative, but also the work by our colleagues in the Forward Defense Practice within the Scowcroft Center for Strategy Security, and also our Tiger project, on war and deterrence in the Indo-Pacific, which of course is a very relevant consideration for this topic today of co-production between the U.S. and Taiwan. So I'd like to thank our panelists. I'd like to thank our sponsor, TechRo, for enabling this event, and thanks to all of you for watching. We look forward to our next Cross-Strait and Beyond seminar. Thank you very much.